president was asked this weekend, do you have a message for North Korea? Do you think you're putting enough pressure on them? This is what he had to say in response. Take a listen.
You'll soon find out, won't you?
Military action.
You're going to soon find out.
You'll soon find out, won't you? And then the question, does that mean military action? He writes, as he says again, you're going to soon find out. You and Senator Graham had dinner with President Trump Monday. Is the president considering a preemptive strike on North Korea?
I don't think so, Jake, but as somebody said, this could be a Cuban Missile Crisis in slow motion. I disagreed with the president's tweet about North Korea by continuing to test disrespected China. They disrespected us, and the numerous agreements made by 3 previous presidents that was supposed to bring this process of their acquiring nuclear weapons and the means to deliver them to a halt. The key to this is China, and the Chinese can put the brakes on this. I do not believe that Kim Jong-un is going to do that by himself. I don't think he's irrational, but I don't think he's concerned about the welfare of his people, to say the least. So I think that China has the key to this, and we got to tell the Chinese that there's a whole lot at stake unless they bring this to a halt, because if they get the weapon and they have the missile, we cannot afford to have that threat to the very continental United States of America.
So what does that mean, though? What if, I mean, the testing continues. They've conducted 9 missile tests just in the Trump administration. Obviously, they have some nuclear capability. If the U.S. were convinced that they had the ability to, I mean, as you know, every time they fail a missile test, they learn something new. If the U.S. were convinced that they were able to marry a delivery system with a nuke, do you then think that President Trump would push forward a preemptive strike?
I think that we have to consider that option as the very last option, and for a number of reasons. And one of the reasons is because there's artillery on the DMZ that can strike Seoul, a city of 26 million people, and the carnage would be horrendous. It's not just like the Cuban Missile Crisis in that there isn't any other aspects of it. This is very serious. Their capabilities of firing artillery on Seoul is absolutely real. And this is, again, is why we have to bring every pressure to bear. And the major lever on North Korea today, and maybe the only lever, is China. But to say you absolutely rule out that option, of course, would be foolish. But it has to be the ultimate last option.
I want to ask you about something that just happened. Reuters is reporting that General H.R. McMaster, President Trump's national security advisor, just told the South Korean government that the U.S. will honor its prior agreement, and the U.S. will pay for the THAAD missile defense system in South Korea to defend that country from a North Korean missile attack. This is in direct contradiction to President Trump, who earlier this week told Reuters he had, quote, informed South Korea it would be appropriate if they paid. It's a billion-dollar system. As you know, sir, this is hardly the first time that the president has made a statement completely at odds with U.S. policy and completely at odds with his own cabinet. How do you explain this? What do you tell world leaders when they ask you about it?
I tell them that he has surrounded himself with an outstanding national security team. I can't guarantee to world leaders that he will always listen to them, but he has so far. I believe that the cruise missile strike in Syria was the first time in 8 years that we have stood up to the carnage and horrible war crimes that are being committed by Bashar Assad, along with their partners, Vladimir Putin. So I tell them that we have a great national security team and that we have now a military that is in very bad shape and needs rebuilding. And I'm embarrassed that the Congress of the United States continues to sequester, which has given us 1,000 pilots short in the Air Force, ships that can't leave port, and 60% of our F-18s, our frontline fighters, not able to fly for lack of spare parts.
Right.
It's disgraceful.
Senator, with all due respect, I know that you admire General McMaster. I know that you admire retired Generals Kelly, retired General Mattis. I get that. But when President Trump says something that is completely at odds with U.S. policy and completely at odds with what people like McMaster are telling the South Korean government, when he claims an armada is headed towards the Korean Peninsula when it is not, I know and you know that world leaders, allies, are confused, frustrated, and sometimes alarmed. Are you not?
They are, but sometimes it's important to watch what the president does rather than what he says. I think that some of the things that actions that he's taken, particularly the cruise missile crisis, including examining the fact that we're not winning in Afghanistan, that we're going to need more troops there, that after, as you mentioned earlier, 16 years, and we're losing or certainly not winning. And there are measures that he is listening to these outstanding military leaders and taking their advice. And again, we need a Congress that will fund and authorize this kind of action, because right now our military is in very bad shape.
Let's turn to domestic policy. The tax plan, such as it was, that President Trump put out there, about half a page on a piece of paper, it would be, based on the information provided and based on what President Trump has proposed before, a boon to the wealthiest Americans. The New York Times reported it amounts to a, quote, multi-trillion-dollar shift to the wealthiest Americans. It would take several steps, including cutting the top tax rate, repealing the alternative minimum tax, repealing the estate tax. Back in 2001, only 2 Republicans voted against the Bush tax cuts. You were one of them. And this is how you explained your position back then. Let me read it to you. Quote, "I just thought it was too tilted to the wealthy, and I still do. We have a wealth gap in this country, and that worries me. The wealth gap is even worse today than it was back then, Senator. Will you oppose the Trump plan as you did the Bush plan? And are you concerned about how much it is shifting money towards the wealthiest Americans?"
Jake, this is the opening bid, and obviously we haven't even seriously put together anything in the United States Senate. The president proposes. Obviously, we'll see how we dispose. I do believe that the first step should be to reduce the corporate tax rate, which is now the highest in the world, which might bring that couple of $1 trillion that's parked overseas home so we could spend it on infrastructure. So reducing the corporate tax rate is an important pillar of it. I wonder if maybe we could take it step by step, but I'd have to see the whole plan before, and how it wins its way through the Congress first.
But as a general principle, sir, I know you feel that way about the corporate tax rate, but in terms of the personal income tax rates that he's talking about proposing, bringing down the top rate significantly, does that concern you at all based on what you've seen?
It's concerned, but as you know, the regulations and the taxes of the last 8 years have given us the last quarter one of the slowest periods of growth in recent history. We've got to stimulate this economy, and I think that reducing regulations, which has already had an effect in the stock market and places like that, and reducing taxes are fine. Let's try to do that for middle-class America, middle-income America, because as you pointed out, the gap between the wealthiest and the least wealthy is growing, has been growing, and needs to be closed.
Let me read to you what House Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi tweeted this week. Quote, "The tax plan rolled out by Donald Trump would have cut his taxes by $30 million in 2005, the only year we have returns for," unquote. Pelosi's basing that on President Trump's 2005 tax return, of course. Given that President Trump is proposing changes that could benefit him personally by tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, do you think that the American people have a right to see his tax returns so that they can know how this plan would affect his bottom line?
I think I've said all along, I thought that every candidate for president should disclose their tax returns, Jake.
Yeah.
I haven't changed.
There was a big climate change march on Saturday. This past week, the Environmental Protection Agency removed most climate change information from its website to, quote, reflect the approach of new leadership. As you know, President Trump has wrongly referred to climate change as a Chinese hoax. You've been a Republican leader on the need to combat man-made climate change. This must concern you.
Well, it concerns me, but I think one of the aspects of it that does concern me is my friends in the environmental community, outright rejection of nuclear power, which is the cleanest that there is, and their refusal to even consider it is something that has been an impediment in moving forward. Yes, I think that climate change is real, but I also think that some of the remedies that are being proposed can harm our economy as well. This is another one of these things where we need to have legislation, debate, and discussion and amendment. This is the same thing with so many of these issues. We just sit there and argue about them. Well, why don't we let the legislative process go forward rather than seeing everything done by executive order?